Good afternoon and welcome to Papims 9.41 course submission and Pvaas. My name is Karen Brulard and I certainly appreciate you taking the time today to learn more about Papims 9.41. Today we're going to talk about the second of two updates that will put in place all the required data and exports for the PIMS March submission of course and Pvaas data. The first update, PIMS 9.4, allowed schools to perform the data entry required for the submission. The update we're talking about today, PIMS 9.41, contains the staff student subtest export, additional editing functions, and calculations of final responsibility and enrollment numbers by subtest. Taking a look at our session objectives today, we'll talk about the process in MMS for PIMS 9.41 with the course submissions, the Pvaas calculations, and the staff student subtest export. We'll certainly look at any MMS help and website resources that we can offer to you to support you in schools, and then we'll end today's session with a question and answer period. Now, before we go into MMS to review PIMS 9.41, I'd like to take a moment to go over to our website so that I can share with you some of the resources that are available, many of which are related to PIMS and more. So if you have not been to our website before, it is located at www.cri-mms.com, and there are many important resources that are available for you here. So once you log in, and then you'll have access to many of these options depending on what you have subscribed to with us, and you'll need your customer website login to do that. If that is something that you don't currently have, then certainly feel free to share that and we'll get that to you. You can share that in the questions panel. And so in the downloads section, we'll be referencing this as we talk through the process here. If we're self-hosted schools, you have the PIMS 9.41 and any other downloads available at the download page. And then in addition, for all of you, whether you're self-hosted or hosted, the full documentation is also located in the downloads section. In the knowledge base, in the searchable knowledge base that we have available on our website, if, for example, I do a search, and I'm including this in quotation marks here to limit my search to specific items related to PIMS 9.4 and 4.1, you see that there are several different documents that are available as resources for you. And for example, for those schools that already completed the updates and the data calculations in 9.4, this is the knowledge base article that you received also at the previous webinar, and then the knowledge base article that you see here at the bottom of my screen, the PIMS 9.41 staff student subtest export. If I click on that, I can see the step-by-step process that also details what we're going to go through today. So I certainly encourage you to visit our website and the knowledge base to download this knowledge base article. And there certainly are many other topics there in addition to PIMS. And then we also have a video learning center and our webinar catalogs and sign up for schools that have a subscription to that. So if you enjoy the session today and find it informative, we certainly welcome you to contact your sales representative to get more information about that. So let's now move into MMS generations and take a look at PIMS 9.41 as it relates to the course and Pvaas submission and the staff student subtest export. So before we're able to implement PIMS 9.41, there are a couple of important things that need to be done. The first one is having gone through the implementation steps in PIMS 9.4, where we went through the step-by-step process for implementing Pvaas, and there are several steps to that process, and you went through that process of creating your teacher responsibility, your teacher-student responsibility, and creating and updating the subtest. And those options, as you may know, are located in the Pennsylvania EDR menu. So if you have completed those steps, these three that I just mentioned here, then you will have the data available to work with in 9.41, and the step-by-step process relating to 9.4 is available in our knowledge base. And then number two, certainly you'll need to have PIMS 9.41 downloaded if you're a self-hosted school, and the MMS online schools that are hosted will have the update installed by MMS. Also, be aware that this update does contain a fix for the change teacher ID number function in MMS. Previously, staff ID numbers in the student subtest table and the teacher-student responsibility table were not being updated. So there is a file included in 9.41 that will remedy that issue. And then once you complete that update and you've installed 9.41, then you'll come into the admin menu if you're not already prompted when you first log into MMS Generations and run the update database structure. So once these items have been completed, we're now ready to walk through PIMS 9.41 and what is required to prepare and export your data for Pvaas. So as we had mentioned, it's of critical importance in PIMS 9.41 that teacher ID numbers are unique for each teacher in the school and the district-wide database. You may have come across duplicates in the PIMS 9.4 Pvaas implementation, so it's important to make sure that you change any teacher ID numbers that are a duplicate, and you would do that in the admin menu. There is an option for change teacher ID numbers. Now, if you are making the changes to teacher IDs in PIMS 9.41, this current version, then you would not need to do any further recalculations. If you had made the changes to teacher IDs in 9.4 in the previous version, then there is a recommended process to recalculate the teacher assignments, teacher-student responsibility, and the staff-student subtest data using those unique teacher IDs. So if you made those changes in 9.4, and again, all these steps are detailed in the knowledge base article that I showed you on our website for 9.41, then what you would do is you would go into the Create, Update, Teacher Assignments, and again, this is if you change the teacher IDs in 9.4, otherwise you don't even need to go through these steps, and you would process the delete operation, and then you would process the create update operation for your teacher assignments. Also for the teacher student responsibility table, you would again process the delete and then the create for all your courses that relate to the teacher IDs that have changed. And then the same for the Create, Update, Staff Student Subtest table. You would process the delete and then you would process the create. So that would then refresh the teacher ID numbers. So number one, we need to make sure that our teacher ID numbers are unique across the school and the database. Number two, we need to confirm that the students that are included for the Pvaas reporting are active for scheduling. And what we mean by that is referring to the biographical jobs menu on the left-hand side in MMS Generations. And if you choose more biographical editing jobs, there's an option for set student active, inactive status. So any students that you have who are inactive in attendance need to be made active. So then the next question is, how can I find out which students are currently inactive in scheduling? And what we recommend for that also is located in the biographical jobs menu. If you choose the print biographical list by field report, and then in the selection here where it says select field for list, the option we would choose is, or the field is SCH_flag, the scheduling active, inactive. And then what that will do is it will provide you with a list of students who are active, a list of students who are inactive in scheduling, so you will know if there's any students that need to have that flag changed to active versus inactive. The A indicates active, and then if there are any inactive students, they would also be included as well later in the list. The next step is confirming that we are in an all students filter. As you see up here at the top, my filter is listed here as all students, sorted by student name. So you don't want only active students, you want all students, so that you will be able to complete your calculations and reporting on all students. The next option we're going to take a look at is the Create, Update, Teacher-Student Responsibility table. This contains a new option that we're going to look at. So this option here that says prepare records for subtest calculations, that is an option that was added in 9.41. So what we need to know about that is that if the teacher-student responsibility table was created in PIMS 9.4, then you do need to choose this option to prepare records for subtest calculations. You would set your date for the PSSA or Keystone when they begin, just like you did previously. You have your overwrite subtest codes option, and you have the option to include any students who may not be entered into attendance, as well as choose a related calendar. And then you would also choose the courses that apply. You would build your list. And so if you had created the teacher-student responsibility table for all of your subtests, teachers, courses, etc., then you would run that prepare records for subtest calculations for the courses that you had previously created in PIMS 9.4 with the teacher-student responsibility table. If the teacher-student responsibility records are deleted, if you come in here at any time and delete these records and then process the create in PIMS 9.41, then you will not need to choose this additional option to prepare records, because in 9.41, this process here is included in the create records. Previously in 9.4, this prepare records did not exist. Now that function is included in the create. So if you delete, if you create, and then create, you do not need to run that again. It will only need to be run one time. And this particular operation then also would need to be run in each school. So this is a school-specific function. So again, if you previously in 9.4 did your create update for the teacher-student responsibility table, then you do need to come in and process the prepare records for subtest calculations, your corresponding choices, courses, and process. If you delete and create in 9.41, which is what I am looking at here in my MMS generations, then you would not need to again run that step. The next option that we're going to take a look at here is the create update staff student subtest table. There is a new option that was added here, this calculate totals option. So a couple of things that we want to verify before we calculate totals, but I wanted to show you this new option before we did that. Number one, in your edit staff student subtest data, if you have worked in here previously, you notice that there are now two options in this edit, and we'll come back to the edit. But what I want to show you is there's an option for base responsibility and then calculated responsibility. So right now we're looking at base responsibility, what is currently entered here and calculated for the students based on all of the prior steps that you took for teacher assignments, for teacher-student responsibility, for staff-student subtest data. So if I leave this selected as base responsibility, my subtest list tab indicates base. So one of the important items that we need to confirm before we run the create update staff student subtest table is that the student responsibilities total 100. We will have a report generated for us if there are student records not equal to 100 and going over 100. We'll talk about that when we go back to the create update staff student subtest. But when I talk about the fact that base responsibilities must total 100 for students, this is where I'm referring to. At the edit staff student subtest data, choosing the subtest and looking at base responsibility. We'll come back later to this calculated. So number one, we confirm that base responsibility for students is equal to 100. And then number two, for each school, we verify in the admin database configuration. We take a look at the attendance tab, and we want to make sure that the option that is selected here, either the first date of non-membership or the last date of enrollment, is the same for each school where we're going to be processing the subtests. So now, going back to the Create, Update, Staff, Student Subtest table, having confirmed that all students are active for scheduling, that the admin database configuration option is the same for all schools for the attendance withdrawal effective date, having confirmed that the base responsibilities total 100, and then also ensuring that we're in an all students filter and that there are no duplicate teacher IDs. Now we come to this Create, Update, Staff, Student Subtest table. So this new option here, Calculate Totals, this option allows MMS to pull together all of the teachers, courses, and students for each subtest, and it also calculates the possible enrollment for each student and teacher and their final responsibility percentage. This particular operation, the Create, Update, Staff, Student Subtest table, is a district-wide operation, so it can be done in any school, and all of the records district-wide will be processed regardless of the school selected. And after you process this operation for your subtests, if there are calculated responsibilities greater than 100, then you will receive a report that will be generated listing the subtest, the student ID name, and the percentage. So that will be something very helpful. And then what do you do with that information? Well, now we come back to the Edit Staff Student Subtest data, and if I choose one of my subtest identifiers and I choose the calculated responsibility, I come to the subtest list tab, which is now calculated because I chose the calculated responsibility option. So my tab indicates subtest list calculated. And so this is a new option. As you may be aware, in 9.4, PIMS 9.4, you could only edit the base responsibility. Here, if you make edits at the calculated responsibility, then these are the final numbers that will be reported for the teacher-student subtest in the export file as long as they're not recalculated. The main purpose here for this feature is to allow edits for cases where rounding may exceed 100. So this is a final opportunity to review your subtests, and if you scroll down further, and in my instance here, I happen to have some zero related items, and so if I edit those here and assign the responsibility for a particular teacher, it'll update that for the student, and that is what will in fact get updated. Now, of course, it is important to think about, not that we would necessarily just come in here and just put 100s in for everyone, but we do want each student to have 100 if that is in fact accurate. So you should see one record per student, and then You should also note that this is your final opportunity to make any changes in the information that's listed here. So while some schools may prefer to go back and see why Be Evergreen did not pull through in the responsibility, that is one option, to go back and redo your calculations, or you can make your edits here at the subtest list calculated, and those are the final numbers that will be exported. And then once that has been completed, you have reviewed all of the subtests and confirmed that the totals are accurate for your students. Then you are ready to actually go to the export itself, the new export. And that is located at the Pennsylvania EDR menu under Exports, and you'll find that in the PIMS course export option. And there is an option available here for the staff student subtest, and you would certainly enter your district code, or if you have been in here previously and saved settings, then you could simply recall those settings, and then you would go ahead and process that export. And again, this operation needs to be run only once in any school. This also is a district-wide process. So those are the steps that you would need to go through in 9.41 to finalize your calculations. So remember that there are many different knowledge-based articles that are available for you about 9.4, and there is some information as well about 9.41 in our knowledge base. Also, you may want to download the documentation for PIMS 9.41, and then also, as you are most likely aware, you can find specific PIMS related information at the Pennsylvania Department of Education website, and then also some additional information about Pvaas, the Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System. Having gone over those things, let's just take a moment to go back and confirm what we talked about. We looked at resources that are available for you, and we talked about the Pvaas 9.41, the new functionality that's available and the different options, what you need to consider before you process the export and the prior steps for that, and then we looked at the export itself. So just to come back over to generations one more time and talk about the items that we discussed. We need to make sure that our teacher ID numbers are unique, confirm students are active for scheduling, confirm that an all-student filter is selected. So those three things are of critical importance here for this export and for the calculations. And then we talked about the new options available, the Create Update Teacher assignments, for the prepare records for subtest calculations. Went into the wrong option there. In the teacher-student responsibility table, the prepare option that's now available if you created previously the teacher-student responsibility in 9.4. If you did all your work in 9.41 or did a complete delete and create, all over again, then you won't have to run that particular option. It needs to be done only once. We talked about the calculate totals in the next option in the create, update, staff, student subtest table. And we talked about confirming base responsibilities equal to 100, also the admin database configuration attendance, the attendance withdrawal effective date being the same for each school. Once you have completed all the prior steps that we talked about, then you can calculate totals for your subtest, after which point you can review the edit staff student subtest data and the calculated responsibility, make any final adjustments, and then you're ready for your export. So I thought maybe it would be helpful just to talk through it one more time, just to review the different steps. So at this time, I'd like to open up the discussion for questions you may have. I'll see how many questions I can get through here in the remaining time that we have. So there's a question about teachers with duplicate teacher ID numbers. There are some schools where they processed the teacher-student responsibility in PIMS 9.4, and what we were seeing at schools is that when they looked at the edit staff student subtest data, it was pulling in, for example, teachers from the elementary school into the high school. So where it shows Engel, for example, it was pulling in the incorrect teacher name because those two teachers, both in the high school and elementary, shared the same ID number. So a couple things. So number one, if you had already processed your edit staff student subtest data in 9.4, you probably would have already seen, the duplicate teachers, the duplicate IDs. You would have seen incorrect teacher names coming up here in the subtest list. So you may then already be alerted to that. Some schools have a similar numbering convention that they use at every campus, their elementary, middle school, and high school, so then it's possible that numbers could get duplicated. If you come to the school management jobs menu and then school management reports, you can also choose the staff listings in the different schools, and you can save either print a hard copy or save a soft copy of that if you want to review the staff ID numbers. But again, if you had already processed this operation, you probably would have seen those duplicates pull through. And then also, if you go into the admin menu to the change teacher ID numbers option, it will show you a list of the teachers, and you can choose which school you want to look at. So here I happen to be looking at the high school, and I can also look at any of the other schools, and I can compare ID numbers if needed. If I know that the incorrect teacher was pulled through, I can take a look at that teacher specifically and see where a duplicate may be between schools. The next question I see here is if you edit the schedule flag from inactive to active, and that is for students that never reported to school that still have a schedule in the system. There's actually a knowledge base article on that particular topic as far as the best practice for a student being active versus inactive. So what it essentially comes down to is that if you have a student that is inactive, then the recommended practice is to go into the biographical module where that student needs to be inactive. Therefore, you can leave the student active in all the other modules, the attendance, the scheduling, and so on and so forth, and then those students will be active still for attendance, scheduling, and so forth, but not for biographical. So they'll show up in your list of inactive students, but their flag for attendance, scheduling, and so forth will be listed as active, and they will be able to be included then in these exports. Next question is about running the create or prepare in 941 for the responsibility. Let's go back to that. So just to recap on this step, because I know this can be a little bit tricky, and I think it will be helpful once you take a look at the knowledge base article on PIMS 9.41, because it does explicitly explain the difference between 9.4 and 9.41. If you had PIMS 9.4 installed and you had come in and done your create update teacher student responsibility table, you already have that table created, then you downloaded the update or had it downloaded for you, the PIMS 9.41. If you created the table previously, then you need to run the prepare records. If you either never got to that point of creating the teacher student responsibility table in 9.4, or for some reason once you have 9.41 you need to delete everything and recreate it again, then it won't be necessary to run the prepare records. If you're running the create in 9.41, then the preparing records is part of that option. So the purpose of this prepare records is for any teacher-student responsibility that was created previously in 9.4 and remains in MMS without changes. So someone's asking about confirming the steps after database configuration. I can certainly go back and review that. So once we have gone through the create, update, teacher, student responsibility, and we did the prepare records, okay, if we did not do our delete and create in 9.41, we did it previously in 9.4, so we ran our prepare and calculate totals. So then before we come to the create, update, staff student subtest here that will allow us to calculate totals for the staff student subtest, before that we need to verify that the base responsibilities for students total 100%, and then that the admin database configuration, that all schools are using the same attendance withdrawal effective date. So we can see the base responsibility at this edit function here for any of the subtests that we choose. So that gives us an opportunity to review the base responsibility for the students. Then we can verify, we looked at the admin database configuration, the two options, as long as each school is using the same option for the withdrawal effective date. So once we have confirmed those two things, the base responsibility and the database configuration, and also ensuring that the other steps previously we talked about, unique teacher ID numbers, students are active for scheduling, all student filter is selected, then we can go to the create, update, staff student subtest. And then at that point, then we would be able to calculate totals. So after we calculate those totals, then we can go to the edit staff student subtest data. We can see what was in fact calculated, if we look at the calculated responsibility, and then in that grid is where we make any final adjustments, tweaks as needed. These are the final numbers that are going to be submitted in the export. And then the last step that we looked at was the exports, PIMS course export option. There are some of these functions that are run in each school, and then the create update is a district-wide function, as is the export. So when we're running our create update teacher assignments, create update teacher student responsibility, we're doing that in each school. And then when we're doing the create update staff student subtest, that is a district-wide function. It's going to look at all of the subtest identifiers used in all the courses, all the course catalogs in all the schools, and group them together on a district-wide basis. I see another question about the teacher ID number, and perhaps you can explain a little bit more about what the situation is there that you're referring to, because the teacher number does need to be unique in the database, because it's going to look for matches when it calculates the staff student subtest. I'm not sure if you're referring to teachers that work in more than one school, perhaps, but maybe you can offer a little more clarification on that. I see another question. If you have one student change, do you have to go through all the steps again? It's not required that you go through all the steps. You would be able to make the change on either that particular student basis. You have the ability to do that. You could make that if the change was at the teacher responsibility level for multiple courses, for a course, and all students that were related to that, you may wish to go back and delete and then create for a group of students, a group of courses for a particular teacher, so that that would all pull through into the calculations. But if you have just one or two students and you want to make the adjustments here at the calculated subtest list tab, then these are the final numbers. So you have the ability to do that. I see another question about reasons the correct responsibility does not come through. If we had probably 4 more hours, we could talk about many of those scenarios. However, there are different reasons. For example, if in the edit course sections, if the teacher responsibility is not indicated correctly there, if it's not indicated correctly in the course catalog, if all active students are not selected, all of the students are not active for scheduling, if there are duplicate teacher IDs. So there's a variety of reasons depending on all the prior steps. And when I say all the prior steps, I'm referring to the steps that we went through in PIMS 9.4 as well as 9.41. This is the 9.41, and then we have a whole nother step-by-step process that we went through in 9.4. So because the steps need to be processed in a particular order, and each step depends on the preceding steps, then if there is any particular information such as entry, withdrawal date for a student, it could cause then later calculations to be inaccurate. So there could be, an adjustment needed to entry withdrawal dates for a particular student or the program that the student is enrolled in. There's many different things that have to be in sync, if you will. But if you're following the step-by-step process and you did so for 9.4, or you just started the process in 9.41 and you're picking up where you left off previously or starting all over again, then the going through all of the steps in the order listed in those knowledge base articles, then the information will pull through based on those calculations. So the goal certainly is that it pulls through accurately. However, the very final option and flexibility that you do have if needed is to make edits here at the subtest list calculated. I hope that was helpful trying to explain that again, because there are so many different scenarios of information, including the ones that I mentioned, such as teacher IDs and so on and so forth, that could cause that. I see a question about the 888, and that is something that was present in 9.4, and just to show you and reassure you of all the information that's out here right at your fingertips, there is a knowledge base specifically on that very question that you might find helpful. So I'm more than happy to explain it, but it's also sometimes nice to know that you have these resources available, because what you're going to see then at the Edit Staff Student Subtest is that any lines with 888, the student and teacher were not enrolled at the same time in that particular subtest. You're not able to make edits to the 888. This is pulled through based on previous calculations of the teacher-student responsibility. So you will not be able to make an edit to 888. If you do need to make an adjustment to responsibility and to disconnect a teacher and student that are not related for responsibility purposes, then the 999 is a way that you can do that. You are able to either indicate the teacher responsibility as 999 in the course sections, for example, so that it will pull through to the calculations, or when you get to the Edit Staff Student Subtest, you have the ability, if needed, to make an adjustment to a teacher responsibility to be 999 if that teacher and student were enrolled but were not assigned to one another. Perhaps a learning support teacher also works with some students in the class, and so not all the students would be assigned to that learning support teacher. That's just an example. So I hope that helps explain that. I see a question about MMS adding a prefix to the student ID. Are you talking about this? I'm not sure if you're talking about the student ID or the teacher ID, because I think we were referring to duplicate teacher IDs here. You do want to have a unique student ID. However, in reference to this particular process that we're looking at for Pvaas, the teacher ID has to be unique. So no, MMS will not automatically prefix that. If you want to do that, you can. So you could have all of your high school teachers prefaced with an H, or if you have a high school particular number, identifier, letter, code in front of, so you could have an H for high school, H101, H102, H103, however you want to set up that convention. And then middle school, you could prefix with an M, and then you can use the same actual number but a different prefix so that it will be unique. That's another idea. Next question I see is errors on base responsibility of either 0 or greater than 100. So the students that are greater than 100, the editing capability is there specifically for that purpose, because sometimes with the rounding of numbers in the calculations, the responsibility may bump over 100, so you have the ability to adjust it once you run the calculations. I'm reading the rest of the question here then. If the student is assigned to the questions relating to students who are inter-school transfers, so because though this is a district-wide process, it's still going to be able to identify the student with the teacher, so it might show 2 different teacher records for that student, and in the base responsibility you may see more than one record. That's what we had originally seen, is in the base responsibility. There were some times students that have more than one date range, they were assigned to different teachers for different date ranges, a general education program versus special education and so forth. However, once you get to the calculated responsibility, most often you see one record per student there. But again, this operation, the edit staff student subtest, for example, and even the create update operation before this one, those are district-wide, so it still should indicate that student accurately if they were enrolled during that entire date range time frame and with the corresponding teachers and the teacher-student responsibility. I see a question here about errors with students that withdrew prior to 10/1/2014. If they were enrolled, however, at your school, then there should still be some date range, I would think, for those students, whether it's 9/1 to 9/30 for those students. So then there's a question about an out-of-district student that's not educated in your building but at the IU, and you don't calculate grades for that student. So it sounds like that student doesn't have an attendance record, wouldn't have a scheduling record, and so on and so forth. So based on the information that you're sharing with me, and I don't know if you typically, in some exports, you have the ability to include the out-of-district students, and that is certainly a question that may even be a good one for on the PIM side to confirm the students that they want to have included and reported. So I might suggest that you verify that with them. And I see another question here about the teacher ID. MMS does not automatically add a prefix, no, to make them unique. And the next question is about the create update staff student subtest table. So the question about that, and you ran the create records but not calculate totals. So it is an order sensitive process, just to reiterate that. So it depends on, so number one, if you ran the create update for the first time in 9.41, double check this so I don't confuse anyone here. And you're talking about the create update staff student subtest table. So before, so you're saying you adjusted the, it sounds like what you're explaining you did right. You ran the create records, edited the base percentages, but then you would still want to run that calculate totals to have MMS pull all of that together. So I'm not sure if at some point you're saying you did. Oh, so if we run it now, will the changes be lost in the base records? So the base will be pulled in to the calculations if you do the calculate totals. If you didn't run the calculate totals at all and you adjusted, you're saying you adjusted just the base but not the calculated subtest, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly. So the options are, so right, if you went back and you completely, did a delete and a create update for each of the options we talked about, the teacher-student responsibility table, the create, edit, staff, student subtest, and so forth, if you did a delete and process it again, then the information that's going to pull through for your subtest calculated is going to be based on whatever is in MMS right now. So I don't know what your, I think you're saying you adjusted the base responsibility, but the answer to your question, I think, is that, if I'm understanding correctly, so ultimately what you need to know is that the calculated total is what is going to be submitted in the export. So if you need to make any immediate changes for the purpose of the export, this subtest list calculated is where you would do that. So if you went back and reran calculations, then it is possible that it would erase any edits that you have made. So I would take a look at your subtest list calculated and see what that is and if that's accurate. If it's accurate, then and your student totals are 100 and the responsibilities indicated correctly and so forth, then you should be ready to process your export. I see another question about a duplicate teacher ID. And again, I think it's going to be helpful when you look at the actual knowledge base article because it explicitly breaks out how you need to go about making those changes. And there's also a knowledge base article on changing a teacher ID number. But if you're making changes to teacher IDs in 9.41, you don't need to recalculate anything. If you are for the first time realizing that you have duplicates and changing them, then you don't need to go through recalculating. If you made the changes in 9.4, then you do need to go back through the create update teacher assignments, do a delete, and then create update for those teachers. Then run the create update teacher student responsibility, do the delete, and then the create for the courses you choose. And then again, the create update staff student subtest table, process the delete, then the create. And certainly, if I didn't completely answer the question that you were asking, you have additional questions, feel free to ask them because sometimes, so I'm trying to understand what the questions are reading through them. And I see a question about a halftime CTC center. Is this mandatory for you? And again, what I would highly recommend is that, and so maybe there are some things that are different about your center. What I would certainly recommend, just to be sure that you know what the Department of Education is expecting, is to touch base with the PIMS help desk and confirm whether they want you to be reporting that data on a halftime CTC. So I'm seeing another question here about summer exits with schedule records. So if you do have the ability, trying to understand the nature of the question, we talked about going to the biographical module, right, for those, for any of your students, that if you need to see which students are active, which are inactive, and if you need to change the flag on those, you have the ability to do it, although you probably want to run the report first and see who those students are, although you may know who they are. And then if you're making those students inactive in biographical but active in all the other modules, let's go ahead and save that, then the students will still be reported and included in the export. So I'm not sure that I 100% understand the question, how should you handle the summer exits with with scheduled records? And maybe you can explain a little bit further on that. So the 888 versus 999, the 888 is a calculation that MMS does. So if there is an 888 that pulls through, it can't be edited. And also, you're not able to update a field here with the 888. The 888 is based on all prior calculations and the fact that the student indicated, and this particular teacher, while the students enrolled in a course related to the subtest identifier, the student is only being taught by this particular teacher as related to this subtest identifier. So this 888 is something that MMS calculates based on all prior calculations and the dates that MMS sees for the courses, the marking periods, the teacher assignment when the teacher is assigned to that course, and so on and so forth. The 999 gives you at the school the ability to edit a teacher for example, the responsibility and make it a 999 if for some reason you have like a co-teacher in a class that doesn't teach all your students, but you still want to have that teacher have responsibility for some students. So you in that course or that section, you may have two different teachers assigned. The first teacher may have, you know, 100% for the majority of the students and have their responsibility indicated as 100%. The second teacher may be a 999 so that they're not going to be then related to every single student in the class, but you can come back then and adjust those students here that relate to, let's say, that co-teacher, that learning support teacher, whatever the case may be. So the 999, you have the ability to edit that if it pulls through here, and I'm not seeing an example, but if one of these pulls through with a 999, see if it's going to let me do it here. So if I had come here and it showed as a 999, I could make an adjustment if this student actually spent 20% of her time with the co-teacher. I could adjust that as needed. So any fields that are indicated as 999 means that you put that in as teacher responsibility in a previous step in the Pvaas calculations. I'm trying to understand the next question here. You have to use the create update student subtest twice is the question. Well, at the create update student subtest table, just to reiterate one more time, because I know this can get confusing. And again, when you have the step-by-step processes in your hands from our website, I think that will make it easier for you. So the create, update, staff student subtest table, again, before you would go ahead and calculate your totals, you want to make sure that your students are base responsibility 100, and you want to double check that admin database configuration attendance tab, the attendance withdrawal effective date. So those are the two things before you run that calculate totals. So I'm not sure that I understand what you mean by running it twice. If you're talking about completely clearing anything that was done previously and running a delete and then a create, maybe that's what you're referring to, just completely deleting everything, which that's certainly up to you, your discretion based on the extensive changes and that you feel need to be made. But if you came back and did a delete on all the courses or some of the courses and did a process, then you would need to create. Then you would need to calculate totals. So I'm hoping that's helpful in what you're asking there. Let me take a look at the next question here. I see another question about whether you're supposed to revise the base responsibility as opposed to the calculated. You have the ability, if you wish, to backtrack through the prior steps, okay, and figure out, the teacher assignment, the courses, the subtest identifiers to run, delete and then create for the different operations. You have the ability to go back and troubleshoot the various steps leading up to the export, okay? However, if you either, in the interest of time, don't have the ability to go through that troubleshooting detailed process, you do have the ability to make the final adjustment at the subtest list calculated, as long as you choose for the subtest identifier the calculated responsibility. That is what is in fact going to get exported. This is a district-wide export. Somebody's asking about running for each school individually. But when this operation is processed, once you get down to, for example, the create, update, staff, student subtest, it's looking at the entire district, as is the edit, staff, student subtest data, as is the actual export. I'm seeing a question here about teachers who are at more than one school. So if it's the same teacher trying to think, the responsibility, that they certainly could be connected to students at multiple schools, right? If I'm understanding correctly. And since even it's the same individual at the school, it's the same teacher regardless of the campus, then it's still going to accurately tie that teacher. Because it's a district-wide operation, it's going to identify that teacher at each of the different locations where they teach and pull it all into the staff student subtest data. So from what you described, it sounds like you're able to have that one teacher, even that teacher who is at multiple locations, have the same ID number. That's what it sounds like to me, just from what you described, because again, it's a district-wide process, so it's going to pull all the students related to that teacher. You would just need to adjust the responsibility, perhaps, depending on the course, the students, and what how much time the students spend with that teacher, may vary by location. I see a question whether you can see all the questions, which actually I can see the questions. However, and again, we'll record this, and also I can certainly follow up if you think it would be helpful. However, of course, with the influx of calls and different things that we're helping schools to get through this PIMS process, the turnaround time, I don't want the turnaround time to delay what your submission and your export. So if that's something that would be helpful to put a Q&A together based on the questions that came up today, I can certainly take a look at doing that, but hopefully you're able to get the answers that you need to proceed to get your submission in based on the webinar today. Another question about teacher ID numbers. They need to be unique within the district, not by building. Okay, the next question is related to the, let's see, the create subtest. And this this process, may vary slightly. I'm just saying this step by step that you're referring to with your question. Do you run create subtest, review the base, and then run create subtest, calculate totals? Yes. Many schools have already gone through the create process in 9.4. So whether you went through it in 9.4, whether you made different adjustments in 9.4, whether you recalculated in 9.41, whether you recalculated for some students or all teachers or all subtest identifiers, those are some things that certainly could be variable from school to school. So when I talked about verifying the base responsibility, the school may have run this base response. The majority of schools that we have spoken with were the majority of the way through the process of creating the Pvaas data, which included the leading up to the edit staff student subtest data. So the majority of schools, if they look at the base responsibility, this is information that was already in there before 9.41. So if you want to see the base responsibility before the final totals, you can look at that, and again, depending on when your school ran different aspects of the process, either in 9.4 or 9.41, the information based on a student-teacher basis could be slightly different from school to school. But again, ultimately, what you need to know and what you need to remember, other than the steps that we went through today and the new options, is that once you calculate totals, it processes all of those teacher-student responsibility final calculations, and any edits that you make at the subtest list calculated are what is included in the export. And I see another question about teacher IDs and the answer about whether if you have two teachers with the same ID, one at the high school, one at the middle school, they do need to be unique. So you would have to manually change them. That is correct. To make them unique, you would have to go to the admin menu to change teacher ID on that and make sure that those two teachers have unique IDs. So for active students and inactive students, where we would go to see if a student is active versus inactive, and we were referring specifically to the scheduling, that students need to be active for scheduling, right? So the two parts of that is, first of all, the print biographical list by field report. It will allow you to identify students that are active versus inactive for the particular field that we're going to choose, the scheduling flag field. So if I choose the field for scheduling flag, then what this report is going to show me is students that are listed as active for scheduling, students that are listed as inactive for scheduling. We'll group them together, A being active, I being inactive. So that's how you can see whether your students are active versus inactive. As far as if you want to see a soft copy of which students, and then if for the students that are inactive, go back to make them active in scheduling. So what we were referring to there is the more biographical editing jobs, the set student active, inactive status. And if you have a student that is no longer enrolled at the school, best practice being to make that student inactive in biographical. So that's, I think, what we were talking about, leave them active in the other modules for reporting purposes. I see another question about not being sure when to do each step. And I know that for me, I'm very visual, so I don't know if it will be helpful to look over the step-by-step document that's out there, and that will actually tell you what you need to do in 9.4, what you need to do in 9.41, which is exactly what we talked about, and the steps that you need to go through and the order that you need to go in. But I can understand that it probably appears a little bit confusing not having that right in front of you, the step-by-step process. And also, since this is going to be recorded and available to schools, it may be helpful to come back and watch it again. Let me just see what other questions there are. And I'm seeing questions about if you made any changes. They're correct at the base level, why the calculated level shows 0. So I don't know if your school already ran the calculate totals in the create, update, student subtest table. If you already ran the calculate totals option, then the final numbers that you're seeing at the edit staff student subtest data, when you look at calculated, are based on some prior calculation. So again, there's a variety of reasons that calculations could show up differently in calculated versus in the base after you run that calculate totals option, that new option. So your option is to go back through all the prior steps, all the teachers, the students, the courses, the subtest identifiers, delete, reprocess, and so forth. So figure out where the root of the issue is, or you can make the adjustments that you need here at the subtest list calculated. Because again, it's an order sensitive process, as we saw in 9.4 and as we're seeing in 9.41. So it's very important that you go in a particular order, which is why the step-by-step document should be very helpful. Another question about if there's a 0 in the teacher column, should it be changed to an 888? The total's already at 100. So it sounds, if that teacher doesn't have responsibility for that student, then it would be accurate changing it to 999 and disconnecting that relationship there. Okay, and I have a school sharing that the summer exits with schedule records are not to be included in Pvaas. So if they're not included in Pvaas, then they won't be included in this calculation, it sounds like, from what you're sharing there, if that's not something that needs to be reported, recorded and part of the calculation. And I see another question about the multiple schools, if you have multiple, locations, and whether you should process by school or by district. So just to recap on that, there are, when we look at the options available here, the Pennsylvania EDR operations, the create update teacher responsibility, that's on a school-by-school basis. Create update teacher student responsibility, school-by-school basis, has to be done per school. But when you get to the create update for the staff student subtest and also the edit staff student subtest data along with the export, that's on a district basis. And I see questions about when the recorded webinar will be posted. We'll certainly get it turned around and posted as soon as possible, and hoping that that can happen by tomorrow. So that's our goal. I can take a look at, actually, someone's looking for the slides, and actually the slides themselves are just the objectives that we talked about. That will be part of the webinar that's posted. The step-by-step process you can find on our website, a knowledge-based article. Just do a search for PIMS 9.4 or 9.41. And I see somebody saying they have to export each school separately. And I'm not sure if that's a school requirement, PIMS requirement, but all I know is, okay, each school is its own. So when you run those particular calculations, it's pulling all the different schools. If they are their own, I don't know if they're also accessible here. If you're processing for all the schools typically, and you see each of the schools here. So it's going to pull from all the schools in the database. If your schools have unique databases in MMS, then perhaps they are not connected. Maybe your particular circumstances are a little bit different, if they are their own LEA. I understand what you're saying there. So that would probably be something that we'd have to look at further, because it'll depend on your circumstances there and which schools, LEAs, are located in each of your MMS databases. Let me follow up on that, okay? Let me confirm that, see if I can get a good answer for you. Thank you very much to everyone for your time today. And again, we will notify all Pennsylvania schools when the webinar is available. Have a great day.